You're listening to NEMAcast, where we take a look at the hottest issues facing the electro industry. I'm Paul Rodriguez, and today we will discuss the U.S. Standard for Product Safety Labels, ANSI Z535.4, Standards for Product Safety Signs and Labels, and how this standard met the needs of manufacturers and led to the more uniform look of today's product safety labels. Joining us today is Geoffrey Peckham, CEO of Clarion Safety Systems and chair of the ANSI Z535 committee. Welcome, Geoffrey.
Thank you. It's great to be here.
Why was there a need for a U.S. standard for product safety labels in the 1980s?
Well, the need for product safety labels really began back in the 1970s and then into the 1980s when an explosion of product liability lawsuits began, and product manufacturers were being sued for the failure to warn or for not providing adequate warnings. Various state and federal courts were defining what constitutes an adequate warning, but prior to 1991, there was no overarching multi-industry U.S. standard that gave definitive guidance for the design of product safety labels. And that changed in 1991 when the ANSI Z535.4 Standard for Product Safety Signs and Labels was first published. This standard gave manufacturers, for the first time, the tool they needed to develop good product warnings that could more effectively communicate safety messages meant to help prevent accidents. If an accident happened, the manufacturer who used the ANSI Z535.4 standard for product safety labels could then better defend themselves if a lawsuit occurred, because the Z535.4 standard was built on legal definitions for what constitutes an adequate warning.
How did ANSI Z535.4 accomplish the task of meeting the needs of manufacturers across industries and across product lines?
That's a great question, because when the ANSI Z535 committee first began the task of writing the ANSI Z535.4 standard, there were many people, both on the committee and in the public, who doubted whether or not a broad, across-industry product safety label standard could even be written. But since its publication in 1991, through its current version today, the ANSI Z535.4 standard has been successfully used by manufacturers across nearly all industries. Its practical rules for the content and format of on-product safety labels are being successfully applied to nearly every type of commercial, industrial, and consumer product that needs warnings. The key to the standard's success, I believe, has been that it's flexible where it needs to be flexible and firm where there's no room for deviation. Take signal words, for instance. The ANSI Z535.4 standard spells out exactly how to choose the proper signal word, whether it's danger, warning, caution, notice, or safety instructions. It also prescribes a specific safety color for each of these words' background panel, like red, orange, yellow, blue, and green, respectively. This was done so the type of safety label and its corresponding severity of risk can be easily discerned from a distance by the label's use of signal word and color.
What's different between an ANSI Z535.4 product safety label and what was used on products before the standard was developed?
Well, before the ANSI Z535.4 standard existed, product safety labels were all over the place in terms of their layouts, their choice of colors, the use of signal words and pictorials, and they varied widely in the kinds of content they tried to convey. If you look at a picture of old products, you'll see the differences between what was used before the Z535.4 standard existed and the more uniform look product safety labels have today.
Why is more uniform content and format important?
Well, first let me say something about content. The Z535.4 standard has said since its 1991 version that a product safety label meant to make people aware of a hazard should describe the hazard, the consequence of interaction with the hazard, the seriousness of the hazard, and how to avoid the hazard. The standard makes it clear that conveying all of this content is optional, and it gives you some advice on this point. But at Clarion, we tell our customers that it's highly important to consider communicating all of this information for two reasons. First, it's what U.S. courts have pretty much agreed defines an adequate warning. And second, because human factors experts say that communicating this increased level of content gives people the knowledge they need to better avoid hazards. For instance, an old product safety label might say, danger, high voltage. That label tells you what the hazard is, but it says nothing about the consequence of interaction or how to avoid the hazard. What if there were two sources of electrical power on the product and you were trying to safely perform some maintenance? Or say you needed to perform maintenance on a machine while its power was on. Wouldn't you want to be warned about the potential of an arc flash explosion and the proper PPE you should be wearing? This is where the older simplistic labels, like danger high voltage, prior to ANSI Z535.4, are most often considered inadequate when compared with today's best practice for the content of product safety labels. In terms of more uniform product safety label formats, we've seen the basic ANSI Z535.4 label format change over the years, from being a single symbol plus signal word plus word message to more reliance on multiple symbols to communicate the label's message, so the message can be communicated across language barriers in a more immediate visual manner. Overall, though, the look and feel of the panel layout arrangement of ANSI Z535.4 labels has remained pretty much the same. Today, when we see a product safety label, we immediately recognize what we're looking at is a safety label, not a general information label or a branding label or some form of packaging label. And this is good, because a uniformity to the layout of product safety label messages makes them stand out from all of the other messages that we see on a daily basis, and that's important for safety.
You spoke a bit about ANSI Z535.4 gaining acceptance across different industries. Can you elaborate on that? How long did it take for the standard to be more widely used?
Here's where the usefulness of the ANSI Z535.4 standard has proven itself. Today in the U.S., nearly every manufacturer who makes products that need safety labels uses the ANSI Z535.4 standard. It took the first 10 years, say between 1991 and 2000, for industries to become aware of the standard's existence and to learn how to use it. During that time period, I lectured at nearly every safety conference geared to commercial and industrial product manufacturers about how to use the ANSI Z535.4 standard to better communicate safety and to reduce product liability exposure. It was a message, I can tell you, that was very well received. The last decade has been marked by the need for manufacturers to develop harmonized systems of safety labels that can be used on their products sold both in the U.S. and abroad. And that's the topic of our next podcast.
Geoffrey, thank you for joining us today, and thank you all for listening. Stay tuned for future podcasts about product safety labels, and visit podcast.nema.org to listen to previously recorded sessions. For NEMAcast, I'm Paul Rodriguez.